Welcome back to Don't Worry, Nobody's Listening podcast. As always, I am your host, Jason Badicki Critchlow. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at JASONBANICKI. Please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Share with your friends, families, neighbors, coworkers, anybody and everybody. Would always love to have more and more people listen to this. And you can also find the podcast on my YouTube channel, which is also JASON. BANICKI. It's on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play Music. I lied, it's not on Stitcher. Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, Castbox, just about anywhere you can find podcasts. Podbean app, obviously. So again, subscribe, rate, review, share with your friends. I've taken the last couple weeks off. A couple weeks ago I was sick. Last week I was out of town for training for work. So I didn't really have time or the equipment to get it done. But like I said on the Facebook page for the Don't Worry, Nobody's Listening podcast, I definitely want to talk about UFC 222 today. It was definitely entertaining to watch, at least a good chunk of it. But you definitely can't talk about that fight without talking about how ridiculous the scoring was. It's almost every fight was a split decision, and none of them should have been split decisions. And they knew, I can't even think of the judge's name. I'm not going to give them time of day to look it up either, but they knew one of the judges was a very questionable judge, and why they were allowed to be anywhere near a scoring thing at this point in time is ridiculous. If they know you're a terrible judge, they shouldn't allow you anywhere near the fight card. So that was definitely took away some from the night, and I'll kind of go through some of the fights where I thought it was just absolutely most blatant and should have been, should have. I think they should be allowed to tap a judge on the shoulder in the middle of a night and be like, "You're done. We've got to substitute." Almost like you have alternate jurors. You should have an alternate scorecard, scorer for fights. That way, when you get somebody about 3 fights in, you realize this is preposterous. You need to go. That way, you don't have these weird scores happening and costing somebody a championship potentially, depending on how it goes. So I didn't really watch the first couple of fights that were on the Fight Pass undercard, so I won't really talk about those. But again, they, split decision, and then a TKO. So you'll notice the 2 split decisions continue to follow. And then I'm going to talk about one of the 2 dumbest fighters of the night, because at one point, early in the fight, I thought I had seen the dumbest fighter to ever fight in UFC, and then later in the night, we get one-upper on that. So Hector Lombard, you get my hats off for being the second dumbest fighter in the UFC ever. And I'm going to guess it was just him losing his temper, or, just being frustrated that caused him to throw 2 punches 2 to 3 seconds after the bell. After, you caught the guy's leg, the round had clearly ended, you threw it down, threw a punch, and then loaded up and threw a second punch, and then you're upset that you get DQ, and you're threatening to protest. No, you clearly throw 2 illegal punches. You knocked the guy concussed so bad that every 30 seconds he was asking, what happened? What happened? Because he knew the round had ended, and the next thing he knows, he comes back to, and he's like, he just can't get his bearings around him. So, yeah, CB Dalloway, hopefully you can take care and do well, because you were definitely winning that first round of that fight anyways. And we'll see you back soon. And Hector Lombard, I hope you get a couple 3-month suspension to think about what you did and maybe reevaluate your life. And like I said, kudos on being the second dumbest person in the fight of the night. And like I said, we'll get to the dumbest later. I'm saving some more for him, but bye-bye, Hector Lombard. The next fight was pretty nondescript. Alexander Hernandez was out there, and he was controlling the round, and then he knocked out Beneil, and it wasn't anything shocking there. I'm not going to get into that one too much, because the undercard fights weren't great, Dodson over Munoz. Again, this is another one where we clearly had a bad scorecard, where one of the judges had him losing, because it's another split decision, and anybody who watched that fight knows John Dodson definitely won that fight, and it was just a shame that you have to keep saying split decision because one judge doesn't know how to score. And it kind of puts us in an interesting position with John Dodson going forward in the UFC because it was his last fight of his contract. He's one of those guys who's great, but not championship level great. And he's had his chances to prove it. And he's a guy who's going to hang around, being an undercard guy or a fight night guy, a main event guy. But he's never going to be a guy who headlines a pay-per-view anymore. He might make some of the pay-per-view fights just to be there. But he'll always be primarily an undercard guy, but you've got to have those guys, and he's entertaining to watch fight. He's a ton of energy. And again, if he's not in a division with Mighty Mouse, he might be a championship guy who could take the belt for a little bit and run with it. But he's just in a situation where he's in a terrible, division that's just absolutely on lock. And unfortunately for everybody in that division, they got to wait till Mighty Mouse kind of just runs through his time because they're not getting past him. Then I'm going to talk about the Mackenzie Dern versus Ashley Yoder fight. This is the one fight where I definitely think that the bad judges' scorecard wasn't the only issue because, it was a tied on one judge's card and then 2 for Mackenzie Dern. And anybody who watched that fight, other than the last 2 minutes when Dern finally got it to the ground, Yoder was in control for 2+ rounds of the fight. And I don't know how that got scored that way. And again, Mackenzie Dern was exactly who we expect her to be. She's, tentative and questionable in the stand-up, but if she gets to the ground, her Brazilian jiu-jitsu expertise is otherworldly, and she's gonna, you talk at 2 minutes left in the fight, and the announcers are talking about how this is a great learning experience from her, and hopefully she'll take something from it and be able to learn from the experience, and then in 2 minutes, suddenly she goes from losing the fight to winning it. And you could tell that they didn't expect her to win, and they definitely didn't agree, but they didn't want to quite call it out because she's definitely one of the UFC's top female prospects going forward. So they were very tentative to take on the brand. And unfortunately it's just another bad decision in the history of combat sport decisions that'll go there and get lost because nobody will care 2 or 3 years from now when Mackenzie Dern did learn that, hey, I actually really do have to learn some of the stand-up game, and I have to learn how to turn the stand-up game into something that will allow me to get it to the ground and where I can control the fight. And then we get into the main card now. The first fight was Ketlin Vieira versus Kat Zingano. And, you keep everybody talking, Ketlin's looking great. She's looking great. This is clearly going to propel her on to bigger and better things. Kat Zingano hadn't fought in over 2 years, and that fight was way closer than it should have been. I don't necessarily agree with the split decision. I mean, Kat Zingano definitely lost 2 out of 3 rounds. But the fact that she won a round after not fighting in 2 years and looks kind of the same way she did 2 years ago, which is a step behind the newer generation of female fighters, put us in a situation where it's like, stop trying to anoint people. I'm tired of announcers. I'm tired of sports pundits. I'm tired of organizations trying to tell us who these next up-and-comers are, the next great ones. It's like we all saw with our eyes somebody who's supposed to be a young up-and-comer struggle to fight somebody who's been off for 2 years, who wasn't looking good before they took a 2-year layoff. And it was just really kind of one of those things where it's just like, enough already. We're tired of it. We don't want to listen to you. Don't make up my mind for me. I'll make up my mind for me on who I think's up and coming. And Kat Zingano, next time you stay retired, you're retired for 2 years, you might want to think about staying retired. There's a reason you retired. I'm sure you needed the money because it's not like there's a high demand out there for you and anything else. But like you were still slow, you were still behind all the skill wise, you're not much of a striker. Still didn't improve that in the last 2 years, and then you come back. It's just a shame. I'm going to move on to Andrei Arlovski versus Stefan Struve. That one was at least a unanimous decision, as it should have been. Andrei Arlovski definitely controlled that fight, and given that he's almost 40, it was really impressive to watch in the heavyweight division how long someone can hang around and reinvent themselves almost. I mean, this is a guy who's been up and down the rankings a bunch and always fallen just one tier shy of being a championship guy, but able to hang with the top contenders. And this was another example of him being able to take out a ranked opponent and control the pace and control the fight and do it in a completely different way. And now, again, it'll be time for another bigger fight for him. But at some point in the not-too-distant future, it'll be the end of his time. And I'm going to skip the next two fights to go up to the very top one, which is the quote-unquote headliner for the night, which is Chris Cyborg versus Yana Kunitskaya. I don't know how to pronounce it. It was her first ever UFC fight, so I've never really heard anybody pronounce it. And it's just like, I'm really tired of hearing about Chris Cyborg only having one loss in MMA. She fights in a division where there's nobody in the division. Again, they brought this girl over from Bellator at 135 and have her fight at 145 because nobody wants to make Chris Cyborg cut 10 pounds. In 5 years, 10 years, she hasn't even attempted to lean herself out and cut those 10 pounds. She continues to want to try and fight catchweight fights or 145 fights, and she's just, instead of leaning out her muscle mass to lose the 10 pounds. So it's just a shame that they allow her to continue to do this and fight in a division where there's no fighters. There's one other MMA fighter, Megan Anderson, who's can't get a visa to work in the United States right now at 145, at legitimately 145. That's it. 2 people. That's an entire division. That's embarrassing that you create a division for a fighter because they don't want to put in the work to get down to the division where all the fighters are at. And then they try to call out those fighters. Like for years, Cyborg and her camp tried to call out Rousey for not fighting her. Rousey's 135. Come fight her at 135. Oh, wait, you can't do it. But you have the cojones to call somebody out? Fuck you, Chris Cyborg. Fuck you. You have created a situation where you get to dictate everything because you're too goddamn stubborn to drop 10 pounds. Like, it ain't hard to lean out 10 pounds of muscle mass over the amount of time she's had. But instead, she's chosen to continue to want to fight catchweight fights or 145 fights once they finally created the division against 135ers. And everybody acts like, oh my God, she's the greatest thing since sliced. No, she's not. She hasn't done shit. She hasn't proven shit. Put her up against somebody who's a legit 145. Oh, wait, they don't exist. That's why she looks impressive. Because she doesn't have to fight anybody. She had to get to 135. Bet you she wouldn't look as impressive because she wouldn't be as strong. That's the problem. She has to give up her strength to get to 135. And now you're trying to force people to gain weight. Well, it ain't as easy to gain lean muscle mass to fight at 145. As people would make you think. You can gain bulk to get to 145, but that's not the same thing as gaining the lean muscle mass you need to keep up your endurance, to be able to strike with power and accuracy. So, I'm sorry, I'm never going to be impressed by Chris Cyborg. Not to mention, we all seem to keep forgetting she flagged in a USADA test back in December. Again, that would be her second steroid fail, but somehow hers always disappears. But if you're John Jones or Nick Diaz for marijuana, you don't catch a break. They just, oh, well, that's too bad. Chris Cyborg flags for steroids again. And it's like, oh, well, no, that wasn't real. Here, let's get you another sample that we've cleaned up for you. So, anybody who's in Camp Cyborg, kudos to you. But I'm not buying the hype because she's accomplished nothing. Zero. Zilch. As a matter of fact, she had to back out of the first fight for the 145-pound belt, and she wasn't even the first holder because she missed weight, if I'm not mistaken. Or, see, now I'm going to have to look that up because that's going to irk me till I know I don't want to get it wrong. Because it's just one of those things where it's like, I know for some reason she couldn't fight that first fight, and she wasn't the it was Jermaine de Rema or whatever it was. But again, you had to create a class. And then after she lost the belt, she went right back down to 135. Like, again, it wasn't even the person who wanted it, or who wanted to keep it. So it was just strange to me that, yeah, there literally had been 2 title holders, and the first one was 2017 was Germaine de Randamie, who defeated Holly Holm, and then vacated it because she didn't want to fight Cyborg. And again, she went back to 135, and ta-da, there you go. So, sorry, it was just, I'm never going to be impressed by what happens. And now I'm going to, but that tells me who the first one was. Why did, I can't remember why Chris Cyborg couldn't fight. Sorry, I'm Googling this now because it's really bothering me. It's like, Chris Cyborg, I have to go to Bellator to be real champ. I'm sorry, I'm reading an article now. I'm going to pause this for a second. Okay, I finally found it. She was held out of UFC 208. Guess what? When she was flagged by USADA again for questionable testing, for taking unapproved substances. Like, sorry, never going to get me to buy in as long as she keeps getting flagged almost annually by USADA and then scrambling to find some questionable doctor to have a prescription. Oh, see, here's the files that show she had a valid prescription. So, sorry, Chris Cyborg, don't buy the hype. Not going to believe the hype. And as for your, well, I can go to Bellator if I have to fight 145. Good riddance. UFC ain't going to miss you none. You aren't drawing jack diddly squat eyes to their screens for anybody. So that leaves me 2 fights left to talk about. I'm going to talk about the O'Malley Andre Sukamath. I'm going to pronounce that awfully wrong. Fight, and this will be the one that goes to my Idiot of the Still Young Millennium Award in the UFC fighting. So if you've watched any of the fights at all, Sean O'Malley's a new up-and-comer, very exciting fighter. Was clearly dominating this fight. And then some point in the midway point of round 3, when all he really needed to do was sit back and run the clock out, he delivered a leg strike that was partially checked. And I haven't looked at the medical reports today, but it looks like he, my guess is he broke his foot or broke his leg when he did it and couldn't stand or put any weight on his leg and was in obvious pain. Very obvious, so much so that the official at one point asked him, can you still go? And he said, yeah. And then at this point now, Andre decides, I'm going to take the fight to the ground. Now, if any of you know the rules, all he would have had to do is stand there while Sean O'Malley was hopping on one leg for 10 seconds and say, hey, he can't protect himself in this fight. And the official would have had to stop the fight, and Andre would have been the winner. Instead, he just keeps taking it to the ground with his corner yelling at him just to stand up. For 2 minutes, they're yelling at him, stand up. And he's still fighting on the ground. Like, I almost want to give him credit for not taking the easy way out, but I can't. Because it wasn't that he didn't take the easy way out. It's that just obviously his fight IQ escaped him in that moment. And it's just perplexing to me that you could have this happen. Like, how do you not notice that he can't put weight on his leg and can't defend himself if you force him to stand up? And I get that that you're a fighter and you want to fight, and I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt on that. But at that point, I hope he gets cut from UFC at this point. Like, you clearly proved that you don't have the fight IQ to fight at a high level. At the end of the day, it's about winning. This isn't about trying to be people friends or do it the right way. Did you win or did you lose? He lost, and he lost badly, and it looked even worse because you will seriously go down as the dumbest fighter in the history of the UFC, and we're all going to laugh at you for decades, absolute decades. And I could beat this guy down further because it was just that bad. It wasn't even close to being a good fight, but it is what it is at this point. It happened. It's going to continue to happen, and sorry about your luck, but we've got to. You are now the dumbest person in combat sports history. Not just fight the UFC, not in Bellator. Combat sports history. Period. End of discussion. Go home in shame. And I'll leave it at that. I don't want to go any farther. And then I want to talk about what I would consider to be the fight of the night, the performance of the night, and that is Brian Ortega against Frankie Edgar. So Frankie Edgar has been around for a while now. One of the absolute top contenders at 145. Was actually scheduled to headline 222 and fight Max Holloway for the belt when Max Holloway got hurt, and easily could have said, hey, you know what? I have my title shot secure. I'm in line. I'll sit out until Holloway's healed and take that fight. But that's never who Frankie Edgar's been. That's not who he was when it came to this. And it's, he deserves every kudos for being everything that a fighter should be. He wanted to go out there and fight another high-ranked contender, the number 3 fighter in the division, in Brian Ortega, and he put it on the line. He risked his title shot just because he wanted to fight. And Frankie Edgar's never been stopped in UFC. He's never been knocked out. He's never been tapped out. He has lost in decisions, but by and large, he's won the vast majority of his fights, and there's a reason he was scheduled to have that 145 title shot. This isn't not a guy who just a fly-by-night guy. He's been around forever, and he's one of those top guys, and he deserved that title shot, and it's a shame that he lost it on this night, and I have no doubt that he'll work to get back, but he just met a force of nature. I mean, Brian Ortega is the guy at 145 now, and he's going to get a shot against Max Holloway, and they're both, 27, 28, somewhere in there. That perfect age where they're just starting to hit their physical prime, and they're the top 2 guys in the division. That's got to be scary for everybody else who's, 31, 32, 33, realizing that your time might be done when you still have 4, 5, 6 good years of fighting left ahead of you. But, I guess the thing that was the most shocking of it is, you have a guy like Brian Ortega who's a Gracie Jiu-Jitsu black belt, who's, not that he hasn't won fights by knockout before, but again, is a guy who usually is going to be dominant on the ground. And when you're talking to a guy like Frankie Edgar who's been there, done that, you do not expect to see an uppercut in the first round. Not just knock him out, knock him off his feet. Literally, knocked him off his feet. Like, you see the uppercut, and it's just, boom, up come the feet, and down he goes. Fight was over then. It was done. It was over. Edgar, you got knocked the fuck out. And then you said all the right things after the fight, as a guy Frankie Edgar did. He's like, I fought a better fighter. I'm going to thank my camp, my team, work to get back. And Brian Ortega, if you don't know who T-City is now, before then, you know who he is now. And it's just one of the best guys in mixed martial arts, period. Like, this is his chance. He's just won the biggest fight of his career. He could take a chance to call out Max Holloway, make sure his title shot's secure, because once you do that, it's pretty much secure anyways. But he could have, started building the hype train for it, all of that. Just as humble could be, says all the things you would want. And then instead of making the call out where everybody expected him to, he calls out his own charitable foundation, saying, look, make some donations to the Brian Ortega Foundation. We can help, do great things. On his interviews on the days after the fight, that's been the same thing, talking about his, scholarships for students in the 2 City program. I don't want to mess that up, but again, Brian Ortega Foundation, please go offer him some support, give him some dollars. This guy is everything that the UFC should be looking to market. He's, eloquent and good in front of a camera and humble and uber skilled. Like, again, you're talking about a guy who's a Gracie black belt jiu-jitsu and has some mean hands. Clearly has some mean hands after you knock one of the most unfinishable guys out in the history of UFC out and off of his feet. Like, literally stood him up and it just boom. But again, if you watch the fight, and this is not to take anything away from Ortega or any of these folks here, but it's just going to be one of those things that's always going to bother me, is that you could clearly tell that Ortega had a better weight cut than Frankie Edgar to get to 145, because when they're in the ring, those guys were at least a weight class apart. And it's one of those things I've advocated for a long time, that they need to stop these drastic weight cuts and stop this preposterous game of, well, we're going to let you fight at 145 because you eked into it by dropping 15 pounds the night before, or, the week before the fight, and got down to 145. And then the 24 hours after, then you're able to rehydrate, fuel up, put food in, put protein in, and everything, and then get your body back up to 10 pounds, add 10 pounds back, where you've just drained out fluid. They need to change to weighing them while they're training and they're walking around weight, or weigh them in an hour before the fight and you don't get to refuel. If you had to go through such a severe weight cut that you're weakened, go to the ring weakened and see if somebody who's a legit 145 or 170 or whatever the weight class may be beats your ass because they're legit. It's one of those things where it's always been a part of combat sports, but it's way different when you get into the world of MMA compared to boxing. You don't see it as much with the drastic weight cuts. A lot of those guys stay, relatively close to where they need to be going into every fight. There's very rare where you hear about people going into a hospital from weight cuts like you do in MMA, where you hear about it every 3 or 4 months in the UFC. Somebody gets hospitalized because they've made it so preposterous with the way they do it that they encourage this drastic behavior. And I hold Zuffa and Dana White, and now was it IMG or whatever, WEM or whoever owns the UFC now, responsible for that. Like, you're the ones who've created went with these rules that allow this ridiculous game to be played. And you can just see when you watch these fights that people are clearly weight classes apart. It's like, it's not the purpose of a weight class is to see who can cut weight better. It's to have equal size fighters to have a competitive fight. And it didn't happen in this case, because I would say Ortega's probably a 155 fighter. And again, he gets down to 145 and gets back up. Good for him, because that's the game, and that's the game you're playing right now. And he did a great job doing it. And like I said, it's not to take anything away from him, because he's a very humble guy and he's a very skilled fighter, clearly one of the best in the world. And we'll get a chance to prove that he's the best 145 fighter in the world. But it doesn't change my position on it's time to change the rules, time to change the game, because it's not really fair to say, hey, we need to just leave it as is the way it's always been, and then wait for the next person to go to the hospital 2 months from now or 3 months from now, or have a fight canceled or become meaningless because somebody couldn't make weight. That again happens where fights have to not be title fights anymore, or they've had to threaten people with not fighting them if they miss weight to try and get them to weight. It's just ridiculous that's the game that's being played. Like, what's your weight? That's your weight class. Congratulations. There's where you fight. And it'd make for better fights, because then you're not seeing, some of these people wouldn't be as wore down from doing the things they have to do to cut weight, from trying to sweat it all out and hold themselves back. It'd make for better fights. It'd make for more entertaining fights. And that would be it. I feel like that's a good place for me to stop on UFC 222. As you could tell, it's not like I'm talking from a place of expertise. I've always, I've been a latecomer the last 3, 4, 5 years, let's say, to UFC fandom. So it's not like I can go back decades and decades like some people can, and talk about the history and the heritage and go as in depth with it, because I'm just not. But when guys like Nate Diaz blew up, and of course I became a fan primarily because I listened to the Punch Drunk Sports podcast, and Mickey Gall would come on all the time and talk about fights, or just come on, and you become a fan, and then you're like, oh, I need to watch the fights, and then you watch it finally, and it's like, oh, hey, this is really skilled fighters doing some really amazing things. And like, I guess I could add this to my sports lexicon, and one more thing I watch, and one more thing I enjoy. And, I was, like I said, I watched the fight Saturday. It was me, my brother, my nephew, who's all of 6 months old, sitting there watching MMA fights, UFC fights, I guess we can call them, as that's what they were, and enjoying it. It was just a fun experience. It's a good time. I guess as like boxing and boxing's heyday, I did experience some of the Tyson hype, but not. I was fairly young back then. It wasn't as big of a deal. But, it was the same kind of thing. People would get together, enjoy the fights, et cetera, et cetera. So that's been my thing. And then I think now I'm going to move on to one of my favorite topics, which is hashtag FireGarPax. I did a short episode on it a few weeks ago, and I'm back to it again because, of course, trade deadline comes and goes. And they kept, Justin Holiday, and they kept Robin Lopez, and they're like, oh, we need, we hung on to him for their leadership, and these are guys we want around to help our young guys. And then as soon as the All-Star break is done, they're like, oh, hey, we're going to bench you guys. We want to develop, let the young guys get time to play, in that. And then, of course, just yesterday, they got issued a memo or a call from Adam Silver saying, look, you can't not dress these guys. You've got to play them. We can't have such obvious tanking going on. Like, the Bulls are so bad at tanking that they can't even do it well. Like, trade Robin Lopez for a second-round pick. Trade Justin Holiday for a second-round pick. You don't necessarily need the picks, but you can't justify sitting guys who are clearly better than the ones you're playing just because, well, we want to see what our young guys are. Well, then if you wanted to see, just go all in on it. But again, they choose this half measure, thinking that, as they usually do, well, if we get close and we're just out of the playoff hunt this year, but maybe we'll have the opportunity to be better next year with one more pick and get right towards the bottom of the playoffs, and we'll keep them just in case we need it to be key pieces, of making a run for this 8, 7, 6 seed as the Bulls are prone to do. And that's just, unfortunately, just another example of how bad GarPax is and GarPax can be, and all the reasons why they shouldn't be allowed to oversee this rebuild. They've never, other than getting lucky with Derrick Rose, shown any foresight, any ability to build a team. And now they're going to be on the hook. So they just traded away Jimmy Butler because they were afraid of, they wanted the flexibility to rebuild, but they're going to end up tying up most likely most of their cap space and keeping Zach LaVine, who can't play defense at all. And I mean, none. Like, he's Jalen Rose, Olay defense bad. And if you've never heard of my theory of Jalen Rose, Olay defense, he was so bad, he just waved the little red thing in front of them, and then Olay as they ran past him to the hoop to score. And that's Zach LaVine now. He's got that turnstile defense, as some others might say, but I prefer the Olay defense. And he's not a consistent scorer. And you're going to have to decide between him and Chris Dunn having the ball in their hands most of the time. And I'll tell you, I'd prefer to be Zach LaVine because at least he can go off and get hot, whereas Chris Dunn cannot. But it's just preposterous that this is where we're at already in this rebuild. Is you traded for, again, a guy who's coming off a torn ACL and a year away from restricted free agency, and your only hope is that you tender him, nobody makes an offer, and you can watch him play one more year before you pay him, hopefully if you get lucky. But then as your team should be turning a corner, and whoever you draft this year, and Lauri Markkanen, and maybe another piece you acquire, start gelling and getting better, and you should be adding pieces. Now you're going to overpay Zach LaVine again, more than you would have had to pay Jimmy Butler, or would have been paying Jimmy Butler. I'm sorry, you guys have no vision and no foresight, and you make terrible trades and make terrible decisions, and have they literally have no business running an NBA franchise. And they've proven it time and time and time again. And it's just It's frustrating as a fan to sit back and watch and see A, Jimmy Butler play as well as he did until he tore his meniscus, and B, Nikola Mirotic have the year he did this year, and realize, hey, if we would have just played these two guys together last year, maybe we wouldn't be blowing up this team right now. We'd be, could have added another piece here or there and been competing, not necessarily for a championship, because this could take a lot to get past Cleveland, and then getting to pass Golden State and Houston isn't going to happen right now, even with Butler and Mirotic performing at peak levels, and Robin Lopez, and add a Justin Holiday in, and I'll bet our point guard and Jerian Grant be your backup point guard, which is where he's going to excel at. But, we never know, because they panicked and added Rajon Rondo, who was a terrible fit, and then added friggin' Dwayne Wade. So you added three guys who weren't three-point shooters when you add Jimmy Butler not being a great three-point shooter, and you just created a situation where it was terrible. It was just like, oh, you guys have no vision. And when does this just, pay the price? Like, I have to hear about the development of Bobby Portis, who will score 20-some or 30-some one night and 2 the next, and then 2 the night after that. It is still averaging like 7-8 points a night, and is, again, in his third year, now getting ready to be his fourth, which means he'll be heading towards restricted free agency, and you'll have to make that decision again. The Bulls don't have players on timelines, right? They're just trying to glob pieces together, a bunch of young pieces, and say, see, look, we're trying to rebuild. And then they're going to end up at the 6, 7, 8 seed again, because they, again, didn't collect any franchise players in the process. Typical Bulls move, typical Gar Pax, and that's why the Bulls need to fire Gar Pax. When you are so bad that you get called out worse than Sam Hinkie did, and I know Sam Hinkie's the reason for a lot of these call-outs, but it's time for you to be fired and Sam Hinkie to get your job. Because I trust Sam Hinkie to do it right much, much more so than I would ever trust Gar Pax. And I don't know who's to blame. Gar Forman, John Paxson. Because they haven't been separated in so long that you can't blame one without the other. It's just time to be done. So if anybody in this world knows Jerry Reinsdorf, please reach out to him and tell him, your front office sucks so bad that they need to be replaced immediately before they fuck up another offseason, before they fuck up again. Because there's zero proof in their history running a franchise that they're not going to fuck up again. And then you get sports rights. Well, maybe the Bulls shouldn't tank. If you tank, then you're develop terrible players, terrible habits of losing, and there's no guarantee that drafting at the top of the draft, 1, 2, or 3, will guarantee you a franchise player. Look at what the Bulls did in drafting Jimmy Butler 30th and Nikola Mirotic 27th, and they threw in Bobby Portis, who I don't know why he was in this, because he's not in the tier of those guys. It's like, but for every one of those, or Taj Gibson 18th, for every one of those, there's a trade 2 picks to go get Doug McDermott, and then trade him and Taj Gibson for a second round pick in Cameron Payne. It's like, you fucked that trade up. There's taking Marquise Teague 30th overall and passing on Draymond Green because you wanted a backup point guard to Derrick Rose, because you were drafting for need, not talent. Could you have imagined the lineup of Jimmy Butler and Draymond Green? Even if with Derrick Rose getting hurt, that would have been your lineup to take you forward and be competitive for the next decade. Oh, wait, no foresight, no vision. All they saw was, we need a backup point guard, so we're going to draft a backup point guard. Guess what? Who couldn't fucking shoot, couldn't fucking pass, couldn't fucking defend, and he flushed out of the league in 2 years. That's how bad he was. And this is the people that were trusting to rebuild the Bulls? Fuck. If Jerry Krause wasn't dead, I'd say bring his fat ass back and let him do it. He couldn't be any worse. At least he tried interesting things like getting the Twin Towers of Tyson Chandler and Eddie Curry. Tried to draft he tried everything he could when he was rebuilding to get picks and get pieces. Can't help it sometimes that you fell fourth in a draft that was 3 people deep and ended up with Marcus fucking Pfizer. Can't help it that Eddie Curry had no heart, both literally and figuratively. You can't help it that your ownership panics a little soon and trades Tyson Chandler just before he figures that all out. You can't help it. Some of the things broke wrong, but at least he took interesting chances. Instead, you get things like, let's trade LaMarcus Aldridge for Tyrese Thomas. Although you got bailed out of that one by Charlotte when they traded a first-round pick for Tyrese Thomas. I still will never understand that. It's like we've all seen him for a long time. Tyrese Thomas is not that good. Like, we all know it. We've all seen it. The only thing he's capable of doing is blocking shots because he can jump high. But, hey, that's the deal. This is who we've got to trust. And quite frankly, I'm at this point where I'm just over it. It is time to move forward and to move past Garpax. So I think this is going to give me roughly 40 minutes, and it's actually right at 40 minutes. A little stuttering and a little pausing and a little meandering, which is going to be par for the course with me. Get used to it, settle in. If you're gonna subscribe, which I hope you do, that's just the deal. And like I said, I want to do a few more episodes solo, and then I'm going to try and pull some people in and have some guests, have some other people to be a second voice. If you have anybody you'd like me to interview or to call in and talk to or anything like that, hit me up on Twitter or Instagram, JSONBANICKI. You can leave it in a review. Again, iTunes, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, Castbox, Peapod. Those are the main places people find podcasts. Like I said, it's on my YouTube page, Jason Banicki. It's on the Facebook page, Don't Worry Nobody's Listening podcast. So, again, thanks for tuning in, and I shall talk at you guys again next week.